The water ahead swelled into a silent wave. A massive alligator, over 10 feet long, surged up from the murky depths, its cold eyes locking onto the exhausted bobcat. With her injured paw, escape was nearly impossible. Too weary to flee, Ash froze, while the rescuers could only watch in horror as the predator's massive jaws opened, ready to snap shut. In the wild, there are no miracles. No last-minute rescues. And yet, in the very moment before death, the unthinkable happened. The swamp erupted into chaos. Water thrashed. Sand exploded into the air. And what happened next left everyone stunned, shattering every certainty that even wildlife experts had once held about the order of nature. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our unexpected stories. In the remote swamplands of Louisiana, where cypress roots rose from the water like giant hands and long strands of gray moss draped down like tattered curtains, even the faintest ripple or trembling leaf could betray the presence of a predator or a deer slipping past. On a humid June morning, Rebecca Hayes, lead rehabilitator at the Bayou Ridge Wildlife Rescue Center, crouched low in the tall grass, binoculars pressed tightly to her eyes. For days, her team had been tracking the signs of a female bobcat they had named Ash. Ash had first drawn their attention when a trail camera captured her dragging her left hind leg, her sleek, tawny coat rippling with every halting step. That limp was no passing injury. When Rebecca slowed the footage down frame by frame, she saw that 2 claws were missing, and the paw was swollen to twice its normal size. Most likely, Ash had stepped on shards of broken glass left carelessly near a campsite. Once again, human negligence had scarred the wild. Rebecca and her colleagues feared that the injury might leave Ash unable to hunt. In the wild, a bobcat cannot afford to slow down. And here in the Louisiana swamps, as in so many other places, danger lurked beneath the murky waters. Alligators slid silently below the surface like dead logs, surfacing only to bask or to kill. Rebecca's childhood had been spent exploring these wetlands, where she learned to read the language of nature. The shift in a dragonfly's flight, the way a flock of egrets lifted into the air. But nothing could prepare her for the heavy weight of responsibility that pressed on her each time the phone rang with news of an animal suffering somewhere out in the wild. Rescuers cannot intervene in every life and death struggle between predator and prey, but they do have a duty to ease the suffering caused by human hands. That limp was a clear warning. Ash was in danger. She was not just another case file in a rescue log. She was a thread in the tapestry of life they had sworn to protect. And if that thread were to unravel, the rat population could explode, throwing the entire food web off balance. Just last week, Ash had been spotted near a narrow slough, its edges thick with pickerel weed and dense buttonbush. Since then, the rescue team had tracked her through paw prints pressed into the mud and tufts of fur snagged on thorny branches. Each morning, they left the center before dawn, following tracks while listening for the harsh, cough-like call distinctive to bobcats. They set up motion-triggered cameras, scattered scent lures along familiar paths, and left small pieces of venison, hoping Ash would linger long enough for them to keep observing her. The plan was to wait until she slowed down enough to be captured safely and taken in for treatment. But the Louisiana swamps were never gentle places, and Rebecca knew time was not on their side. On the 4th morning, as the sun began to tear through the thin veil of mist, Rebecca's colleague Daniel gave a silent signal. He had spotted movement along the water's edge, where the bank rose to form a sandy shelf. Through the dense ferns, Rebecca caught a glimpse of golden fur flashing. Ash emerged from the shadows, her shoulders rolling with the fluid grace of her species, even as she favored her injured paw. Her ears stood tall, tufted with black hair, and her tawny coat was sprinkled with dark spots, like sunlight filtering through leaves. The white underside of her bob's tail flicked as she paused, lifting her nose high. She sniffed the air, searching for a scent on the wind. And in that fleeting moment, she looked more like a house cat at ease in a backyard than a silent predator moving through one of the last remaining wetlands of the American South. Rebecca's heart tightened at the sight. "She's here," she whispered into the radio. "Still walking. Paw is swollen, but not broken." The plan was to wait until Ash bedded down under the scorching midday sun, then quietly circle around and set a humane trap. They had arranged for Dr. Morales, a veterinarian, to meet them with anesthetics and antibiotics. If all went according to plan, Ash could be treated and released back into the swamp within a week. As Rebecca watched, Ash lowered herself onto the sandy shelf and began carefully licking her injured paw, using her teeth to pull out bits of debris still embedded there. Rebecca noticed the faint shiver in her flank, and suddenly realized the animal had grown gaunt. Her ribs stood out more sharply than ever. Hunger and pain were wearing her down. Out on the water, a turtle's head surfaced briefly, then slipped away again. On the muddy bank, a pair of white ibises probed with their curved beaks, oblivious to the quiet tragedy unfolding just ahead. The swamp still hummed with life. Then, from the far side of the slough, a faint ripple began moving steadily toward the shore. Rebecca froze, her whole body tensing. She knew that ripple instantly. Alligators seldom announce their attack, but whenever they move, a bow wave always glides ahead of them. An alligator was closing in. Rebecca's mind flashed through everything she knew about the reptile's habits. Midsummer also meant mating season. Large males often became aggressive and ravenous after their battles for mates. A bobcat, no matter how strong, would never choose to confront an alligator head-on. With her injured paw, Ash had no chance of leaping away in time. Rebecca felt a chill crawl up the back of her neck. She jerked the binoculars to her eyes, her heart pounding. And just as she feared breaking the surface of the water, a dark triangular head rose slowly, cold yellow eyes locking onto its target. The eyes glistened like wet pebbles in the sun. The reptile slowed as it reached the shallows, pushing its massive body upward to rest on the submerged cypress roots. From this distance, Rebecca estimated it at nearly 10 feet long, an old male, with a deep scar running across its snout. She had seen him before. Locals around the swamp called him Old Scar, named for the jagged wound left by a boat propeller years earlier. He had learned to associate the presence of people with food, and though he had never attacked anyone, his fear of humans was long gone. The triangular head lifted, rivulets of water streaming down the rough scales, and then the heavy body began to crawl toward the sandy shelf where Ash lay. Rebecca's chest tightened, her breath short and shallow as the tension coiled inside her. In another context, Rebecca might have admired that strength, the way those muscled forelimbs propelled such a massive body with astonishing speed. Alligators are apex predators. Their jaws can deliver a bite force of more than 2,000 pounds. Rebecca had often explained to school children the importance of these creatures, how the gator holes they dig can become vital refuges for fish and frogs during droughts. She respected them, but respect could not loosen the knot of fear tightening in her chest as she saw Old Scar's cold gaze fixed on Ash. Ash lifted her head at the sound of heavy scales dragging across sand. She too had seen the predator. Her ears flattened, and she struggled to her feet. For a fleeting moment, Rebecca hoped she might dart into the brush. But the instant Ash put weight on her injured paw, she collapsed, her body lurching as she tried desperately to regain her balance. She staggered toward the dense clump of palmettos, but the alligator had already lunged, jaws agape. At close range, an alligator strikes with terrifying speed faster than the human eye can follow. Old Scar's triangular snout opened wide, revealing rows of conical teeth and the dark pink flesh of his throat. Rebecca could see the notches where some teeth had once broken and grown back. Time seemed to slow. Every instinct in Rebecca screamed to intervene, to rush forward. shout, do anything to stop it. But she knew it would do no good. Those who interfere with alligators often bring disaster upon themselves. Startling the reptile could trigger a reflexive snap, and the price would be even more terrible. The law also strictly forbade harming native predators. Their mission was to heal and to educate, not to choose sides. Rebecca felt helpless, her chest tight with despair. Beside her, Daniel muttered a curse under his breath. He gripped the tranquilizer gun tightly, but it was loaded with darts meant for a 30-pound bobcat, not a massive reptile weighing more than 600 pounds. Even if he fired, the alligator would shrug off the sedative long enough to deliver a fatal bite. The moment stretched endlessly, their heartbeats pounding like war drums. Ash, eyes wide with terror, crouched low against the sand. Then suddenly, from the dense palmettos behind her, came a rustling like a strong wind tearing through dry leaves. A blur shot forward. A male bobcat, nearly twice Ash's size. Muscles rippled with compressed power beneath his golden spotted coat. With a single fluid leap, the male bobcat landed squarely on Old Scar's head. Claws outstretched, teeth bared. The impact slammed the alligator's jaws shut with a sharp crack, sand exploding as the two predators collided. The bobcat raked his front claws across the gator's eye ridge, then sank his teeth into the flesh around the socket where the scales were thinnest. Old Scar thrashed violently, whipping his head to the side, mud and water spraying like a storm. Yet the male clung on, claws driven deep into the rough hide as though clutching a tree trunk in the heart of a hurricane. Rebecca's jaw locked. She had never seen a bobcat dare to face down a full-grown alligator. Bobcats are agile and fierce, but they rarely weigh more than 35 pounds. Old Scar weighed 10 times that. And yet the male fought with a ferocity steeped in desperation. This was no meaningless attack. This was protection. Bobcats are solitary creatures, except during mating season. But Rebecca knew there had been cases where a male stayed close when they were young. Could this be Ash's mate? Rebecca's heartbeat thundered, and she had to remind herself to draw a deep breath. Chaos erupted on the sandbar. Old Scar twisted violently, unleashing the infamous death roll that had claimed countless victims. But the male bobcat seemed to anticipate it. He released his grip at the exact moment the gator spun, leaping aside, then immediately pounced again from another angle, aiming straight for the predator's eyes. This time, he slashed with his hind claws, leaving pale gouges across the reptile's thick hide. Every strike was sharp and deliberate, a blend of speed and strategy that belied the bobcat's modest frame. Old Scar bellowed, a deep, guttural roar that reverberated through Rebecca's bones. With a violent lash of his tail, he surged backward into the water, dragging the fight into the territory where he held the upper hand. The male bobcat lunged once more, his body arching over the gator's snout. But as the water deepened, he deliberately pulled back, planting himself firmly between Ash and the swamp, standing like a living wall. In a moment of terrifying tension, the three creatures were only a few steps apart. The predator, the protector, and the wounded, locked in a primal tableau of survival. Rebecca and Daniel clung to the brush, their knuckles white from gripping so hard. "Come on, buddy," Daniel whispered, not even sure whether he was speaking to the bobcat or the alligator. Old Scar's eyes, one now clearly damaged, flashed with fury beneath the ridged brow. The old bull seemed to weigh the cost of the encounter. He had expected an easy meal, a weakened bobcat lying exposed on the sandbar. He had not expected claws raking and teeth tearing into his eye. Slowly, he backed away, his heavy body sinking once more into the mire until only his eyes hovered above the water's surface. Then, with a deep, guttural hiss, Old Scar vanished completely, leaving only a swirl of bubbles to mark the predator's silent retreat. The male bobcat stood frozen for a long while, his flanks heaving with ragged breaths. Long scratches marked his shoulder where the gator's scales had raked him, and one ear was torn. He turned his head toward Ash, inhaling her scent with a brief touch against her face, a fleeting gesture that spoke volumes in the silent language of the wild. Ash trembled, letting out a rasping cough before leaning against him. The male glanced once more toward the water, his muscles still taut, ready to spring should danger return. Only after a full minute had passed did he begin to ease, though his ears remained pricked and alert. He stepped forward once, paused, then slowly moved into the palmettos, Ash trailing close beside him. Her limp grew more pronounced, and more than once she nearly stumbled. Each time he stopped, waiting until she regained her balance before continuing. Rebecca and Daniel watched in silence as the two bobcats disappeared into the sawgrass, their spotted coats dissolving into shifting streaks of light, leaving only the faint sway of leaves to mark the path they had taken. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. She had braced herself to witness a tragedy. Instead, she had witnessed a rare act of courage and devotion. The male bobcat's appearance had changed the outcome entirely. Rebecca and Daniel exchanged a glance, half relief, half disbelief at what had just unfolded before them. But there was no time to bask in the miracle. Ash was still injured. Now, both bobcats had slipped deeper into the swamp, beyond the reach of the trail cameras. Yet Rebecca was determined to find them again, no matter what it took. To ensure Ash received treatment, they quickly packed up their equipment, marked the location on the GPS, and radioed back to headquarters. Ash just encountered an alligator, Rebecca reported. She's with a male. He defended her. We need to adjust our plan. Back at the rescue center, Rebecca replayed the camera footage again and again. Every member of the team crowded into the small monitoring room, eyes fixed on the screen. Even Dr. Morales could only shake his head in amazement, his gaze locked on the images. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Morales murmured. "That male may have saved her life." He examined the close-ups of Ash's paw, noting the swelling and the angle of the injury. "If we don't treat this infection quickly, she won't be able to hunt or raise young. We have only a narrow window before sepsis sets in." The plan immediately shifted from passive observation to active rescue. They decided to set a larger trap in the area where the two bobcats had vanished. Inside the trap was fresh venison, lined with soft blankets to prevent injury. Rebecca and Daniel would then hide nearby, waiting for the moment the cats appeared. They could only hope that the male's protective instincts would not make him too wary of human scent. 3 days later, at dusk, Rebecca crouched once more among the palmettos, swatting at mosquitoes and straining to listen. The swamp's chorus rose, the raspy calls of frogs mingling with the droning hum of cicadas, while fireflies winked like tiny embers in the falling dark. In the open doorway of the trap, a chunk of venison exuded its rich scent. Rebecca's muscles ached from holding still so long. She had almost convinced herself the bobcats would never return, when the male appeared like a shadow, silent and cautious. He circled the trap, nostrils flaring. He sniffed the metal frame, then lifted his head to glance out over the slough. Moments later, Ash appeared behind him. She was still heavily limping, her paw beginning to seep with pus. The male nudged Ash forward, urging her closer to the meat. She hesitated, her ears swiveling like antennae, catching every signal. Hunger wrestled with fear in each tentative step. Slowly, Ash lifted her front paws onto the trap, then quickly pulled back. Rebecca held her breath. The trap had been designed with a pressure plate. Once at least 20 pounds pressed down, the door would fall shut. Ash weighed around 25. The male nudged her again, and this time, hunger overcame fear. Ash stepped fully inside and lowered her head to feed. The door swung shut with a sharp click. Ash spun around in alarm, eyes wide with panic, but the door held firm. The male bobcat hissed, pacing around the trap, his fur bristling. Rebecca waited a beat, giving both animals time to adjust, then whispered to Daniel. Now, they rose from their hiding place, carrying nets and thick gloves, stepping forward slowly. The moment he saw them, the male bobcat flattened his ears, a low growl rumbling in his throat, his body tensing into a stance as fierce as when he had faced Old Scar. Rebecca lowered her voice, calling to him in the same tone she used with kittens. "It's okay, big guy. We're here to help her." The male backed away, but he did not flee far. He crouched beneath the palmettos, eyes glinting as he watched them cover the trap with a blanket to calm Ash. When they lifted the trap onto a stretcher and carried it slowly toward the waiting truck, he followed at a distance, his eyes catching the flashlight beams in the dark. He stopped at the tree line as they loaded the trap, and when the truck pulled away, his silhouette remained a silent sentinel until distance and darkness swallowed him completely. At the clinic, Dr. Morales placed Ash under anesthesia and began cleaning the wound on her paw. The cut was deeper than anyone had expected, slicing through the pad and reaching up between two toes. Inside, fragments still remained, tiny shards of glass mixed with sand. He carefully flushed it with saline, extracted the debris, then administered antibiotics. Finally, he wrapped the paw securely and gave her fluids to combat dehydration, while the entire team stood silently around him, watching every step. For 3 days, Ash slept peacefully in a straw-lined room, her breathing steady like the distant rhythm of waves. Rebecca spent hours sitting by her side, whispering softly, letting her scent and voice become familiar to the bobcat. Outside the window, she kept an eye on the fields surrounding the center. More than once, she caught sight of the male bobcat lingering at the forest's edge. Each time, he would pace and sniff before melting back into the trees. Rebecca left pieces of meat near the tree line, making sure he had food to sustain him. When Ash finally woke fully, her clear eyes brightening, she pressed her nose gently against Rebecca's gloved hand. Rebecca smiled and whispered softly, "He's still waiting for you out there." Once the infection had subsided and the wound had begun to knit, it was time to release her back into the wild. Rebecca and Dr. Morales removed the bandage, watching as Ash carefully tested her paw. She put weight on it without flinching. Her muscles had regained their strength thanks to the high-protein diet she'd been given throughout her recovery. They loaded the cage into the truck and drove back to the slough. When they arrived, the male bobcat stepped out from the ferns, as if he had been waiting all along. He watched silently as they opened the cage door. Ash hesitated only a moment before leaping out. The male approached, touching his nose to hers. For a fleeting instant, their muzzles met. Then, after a brief glance toward the humans, the two of them bounded into the brush. The male looked back once, his eyes locking with Rebecca's rapics. In those eyes, there was no gratitude, only pure, untamed instinct. And that was as it should be. Wild animals owe us nothing. It is we who owe them a safe home in a changing world. Weeks slipped into months. Summer gave way to fall, and the swamp donned a new cloak. The cypress needles turned a rusty red before drifting onto the water's surface, floating like tiny boats across the boundless stillness. From time to time, Rebecca still caught glimpses of the bobcat pair through motion-triggered cameras. They were always together. Then, in late October, something new appeared in the frame. Small shapes trotting behind the adult cats, ears too big for their heads, fur fuzzy and spotted dark. Kittens, at least 3 of them. Ash and the male had raised a litter. Rebecca's heart leapt with joy. It meant Ash's paw had healed well enough for her to hunt, nurse, and care for her young. It meant the pair had secured enough territory and prey to sustain a family. It meant that the risk the male had once taken to defend Ash had been repaid with new life. In the weeks that followed, the rescue team watched in fascination on the monitors, the kittens chasing one another, ambushing in the tall grass, practicing their pounces on damp clumps of moss. The male joined in as well, rolling onto his back, swatting gently, teaching the little ones how to stalk and chase like true hunters. Such paternal involvement is rare in bobcats, but it does happen, especially when a male has formed a strong bond with the female. Rebecca and Daniel occasionally visited the edge of the slough, always standing downwind so they could observe without being detected. Once, they watched as Ash led her kittens toward the water's edge. She stopped a few yards short, crouching low, her ears pointed sharply forward. The male sat nearby, his eyes fixed tensely on the swamp. Out in the water, an alligator lay half-submerged, only its nostrils breaking the surface. The kittens crept forward, curious, their tiny paws pressing into the mud. Ash flicked her tail sharply, and the whole litter froze. She let them watch the reptile for a moment, then deliberately led them away, each step exaggerated and careful as she circled around the bog. The lesson was clear. This water held monsters. On another day, Rebecca watched the male bring back a rabbit, dropping it in front of the young ones before stepping back, letting them practice their instinctive killing bites. His reddish-brown coat shimmered brilliantly in the sun. The scars from his battle with Old Scar were now only faint white lines hidden beneath the thick fur. Winter came gently to the swamp. The temperature dipped only slightly, and the humidity eased just enough for Rebecca to catch the sweet, earthy scent of decaying leaves. The bobcat family grew stronger and more resilient with each passing day. The kittens gradually lost their juvenile spots, their coats shifting to the reddish-brown of their parents. They began to expand their territory, venturing deeper into the oak hammocks and pine savannas along the swamp's edges. Rebecca watched as the family crossed game trails, leaving neat tracks in the soft earth prints that would vanish under the morning dew. Nearby, a few deer lifted their heads from the grass, ears twitching with instinctive caution. The balance of the ecosystem held, each creature keeping its place in the greater tapestry of life. Old Scar was still seen, gliding silently through the deeper waters, one eye clouded but his body unscathed. He avoided the sandbar where he had been humiliated, favoring the far side of the slough instead. Perhaps he remembered. The story of the alligator and the bobcat pair quickly spread throughout the community. Rebecca often retold it to school children and to local reporters. She did not tell it to sensationalize violence, but to illustrate the interconnectedness of species, the courage nature can reveal, and the ways in which humans can both help and harm. She always emphasized, the male's bravery would have meant nothing if Ash had not received medical care, and Ash's recovery would have meant nothing if she had not had safe land on which to hunt and raise her young. Rebecca spoke about the importance of keeping the swamp clean, of proper waste disposal, and of supporting conservation organizations. She told people about the moment she looked into the eyes of a wild bobcat eyes, both alien and familiar, and saw within them a fierce will to live and to protect. Years later, Rebecca would sometimes return to the slough at dusk. The buttressed roots of the cypress still rose like sculptures, and the gray strands of moss still swayed in the evening breeze. She knew the old male was surely gone. Bobcats in the wild rarely live more than 5 or 6 years. Perhaps now it was his descendants who walked these familiar trails. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and bats began to swirl overhead, Rebecca caught movement in the palmettos. A bobcat stepped onto the sandbar, followed by another slightly smaller one. Behind them came 2 kittens, their coats still vividly spotted in the fiery twilight. The adult pair paused at the water's edge. One lifted its head to look out across the slough, ears pricked, then slowly turned its gaze toward the tree line where Rebecca hid. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. Then the bobcat turned away and melted into the night. Rebecca let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The swamp had just offered her a glimpse into its continuing story, and she felt honored to have witnessed it. The incident of an alligator targeting an injured bobcat, only to be driven off by her mate, had become a tale told around campfires and in classrooms. A legend in its own right, it reminded people that courage comes in many forms. not only in human heroes, but in the instinct of a father defending his mate, in the perseverance of a mother limping through pain, and in the compassion of rescuers, those who watch, who wait, and who heal. It underscored that nature is not a series of isolated events, but a tapestry woven from countless connections. Sometimes, those very connections create breathtaking moments where tenderness and terror intertwine, reminding us of the wild heart that still beats just beyond our backyards. For Rebecca, it only deepened her commitment to a life of rescue and rehabilitation. She would never forget the sight of the male bobcat springing from the brush, the guttural bellow of the alligator, or the moment when the two bobcats leaned into each other after the storm of danger had passed. In that moment, the swamp had revealed a rare truth, that even in the harshest of worlds, love and courage can tip the scales.